Greetings, third-in-line men. I'm Patrick Smith. This is Disenthrall. Welcome back. Today we're going to discuss a pending court case, or an in-progress court case in Alabama, where a judge has allowed a teen to sue on behalf of his aborted fetus. It's a very interesting story, first of its kind that I've heard of, especially. Apparently there's a unique legal situation in Alabama that is making this possible. But it brings up an important topic that is not discussed enough or given enough thought or credence or discussion these days. The story says, a teenager in Alabama is suing an abortion clinic for terminating the life of his unborn child against his wishes. On Tuesday, an Alabama County court recognized the aborted fetus Baby Roe as a plaintiff in the lawsuit, making the case one of the first of its kind, his lawyer said. Ryan Majors, 19, of Madison County, claims his girlfriend got a medicated abortion at the Alabama Women's Center for Reproductive Alternatives in Huntsville in February 2017, when she was 6 weeks pregnant, according to legal documents, even though he urged her not to terminate the pregnancy. Alabama recognizes the personhood of a fetus, so Majors is suing on behalf of the fetus and himself. So I do plan on, in the near future, doing a full, in-depth, likely multi-video breakdown of the entire ethics involved in abortion. Today is not going to be that day. Today we're just going to discuss the rights of fathers, which aren't really even rights. They don't exist. The lack of rights for fathers, the lack of men's rights in the area of abortion. This is the first case that I've ever heard of, and I think that has ever existed, where a man has been able to use government courts to actually sue somebody over the involuntary, from his perspective, ending of the life of his child. This is kind of huge. Apparently in Alabama, and I'm going to do more research on this, and I will let you know and do another video on it if I find something interesting, Alabama recognizes the quote-unquote personhood of a fetus, which is very interesting, that it takes being a person to, at least in most people's minds or in the government's minds, you don't get rights until you're a person, but what makes a person is such a subjective thing. And again, that's gonna go right into like the long conversation. It's going to take some effort. It's going to take some philosophical, rigorous mental effort to define every term involved and to break down why abortion is murder. But we're not going to do that today. We're going to discuss this story. Baby Roe's innocent life was taken by the profiteering of the Alabama's Women's Center. This is a quote. And while no court will be able to bring Baby Roe back to life, we will seek to the fullest extent of justice on behalf of Baby Roe and Baby Roe's father, attorney Brent Helms said in a statement. Quote, the time is ripe for consistency in Alabama's jurisprudence. Either we fully acknowledge the personhood of the unborn, or we cherry pick which innocents we protect and which ones we trash for profit. Madison County Probate Court Judge Frank Barger allowed Majors to name his aborted child as a co-plaintiff in his case against Alabama Women's Center, a move that came just 4 months after the passage of an amendment that gave fetuses personhood, or the same legal rights as any other person under the state constitution. Helms believes the case could make it to the Supreme Court. Quote, I'm here for this is Majors talking, quote, I am here for the men who actually want to have their baby. I believe every child from conception is a baby and deserves to live. But the case has alarmed pro-choice activists. On Twitter, president of NARAL, Pro-Choice America, called it, quote, a very scary case that is, quote, asserting women's rights third in line. So it was a bad idea to bring this topic up without actually wanting to get into the philosophy. So I will give you the TLDR headline version of the logic behind how to think about abortion. And I welcome counter arguments and I welcome challenges to everything I say on this channel. All the logic, all the philosophy, all the ideas and principles I welcome. I want I cherish challenges. If someone can show me where I'm wrong, I want that to happen. I enjoy it when that happens because it means that my thinking and my perception become more in line with reality. So the question that there's two questions that have to be answered before any discussion around abortion, or frankly, in most other discussions surrounding rights and personhood and legal rights in this case. What are rights? First of all, never gets defined in an arduous and in a consistent way that mirrors reality and how these things actually function. What are rights? And the second question is, who gets them? Both of these questions must have answers before beginning pretty much any other discussion. Discussions on coma patients, discussions on property rights, discussions on just about any conflict situation. You have to understand what are rights and who gets them. So really quickly, TLDR, not going deep dive today. The best definition that I have found, created, hashed together, worked out, and figured out for what are rights and who gets them is as follows. Rights are mutual, reciprocal understandings between sentient beings. They are not built into nature in some kind of way. Like a lot of people will say rights don't exist in reality. Correct. Rights are concepts. That means to be able to act in a way in accordance with a framework of rights, you have to have the capacity to conceptualize. You have to have the ability, the capacity to think in terms of concepts. That is a higher order thought process. Rights are a mutual, reciprocal understanding between sentient beings. What does that mean? Every word of that was chosen specifically and precisely because it bears meaning. And to be clear, the way I use the word sentience is non-standard because there just isn't a word that wraps this definition up well, so I will state it here. When I say sentience, when I say sentient, I mean that it is a being that has two capacities. Number one, that it has the capacity to think in terms of concepts, to conceptualize. That means to think of, you know, I can teach a sentient being that the concept of cup, not just that this specific object in reality is a cup. I can teach you the concept of cup so that if you encounter other objects that match these attributes, you will associate those physical objects in the real world to the concept of cup in your head. This is necessary and a prerequisite for rights because rights are concepts. They don't exist in reality. If I punch an innocent person, an anvil doesn't fall out of the sky and land on my head to punish me. Rights are only conceptual. They're things that function between sentient minds. And so if a mind, a plant, an amoeba, an animal, doesn't have the capacity to conceptualize, to think in terms of concepts, to think in terms of rights, then they don't have the ability to participate in this reciprocal agreement that is rights between sentient people. The second part of sentience, in the way that I'm using it, is the capacity to plan and control your future. What this means is to imagine a future state of being that you want to have yourself arrive at, then to imagine, you know, a list of possible plans that you could enact to achieve that future state, weigh them between each other to figure out which one is the best, cost-benefit analysis and all that good stuff. Then to choose one, and then to use one's agency and choice to select one and enact it and attempt to make that imagined future state a reality. So those two capacities, to plan and execute one's future in the way that they want it to be, and to think in terms of concepts, to conceptualize. That's what I call sentience. So when I say that rights are mutual reciprocal understandings between sentient beings, I'm answering the first question pretty clearly and pretty precisely. If you are sentient, and if you choose to share the mutual understanding with other sentient beings around you that are rights, and we haven't defined the rights specifically that we're going to plug into this equation. We're just simply defining the concept of rights and how it functions in the world, and more importantly, how it doesn't function in the world with anvils dropping on our heads, right? If you choose to participate in the mutual understanding, if you choose to reciprocate rights with other people, then you're participating in rights. So if I have an expectation that all the people around me will not punch me as long as I'm being peaceful, then I have a very natural, very reasonable expectation and understanding that I will not go around punching other peaceful people around me. That's the reciprocity. That's the mutual understanding. Now let's answer who gets them. So we've kind of already talked about that by our definition of sentience. Rights are mutual reciprocal understandings between sentient beings that should be afforded to all beings that are or will be sentient and continue to reciprocate them. And again, every word in that is important for all rights discussions. Every word. They should be afforded to all beings that are or will become sentient and who continue to reciprocate them. In the case of fetuses, they will become sentient in all likelihood, unless they are, detected to not have a brain or, some other deformation or disease or something that will prevent them from being viable ever. So if you are sentient and you reciprocate, then you should be afforded rights until you stop reciprocating. That's a complicated way of describing self-defense. If you punch me, then you have stopped reciprocating the concepts known as rights. You have stopped existing in the realm of rights. You are no longer a moral actor in a way. I no longer have to respect your rights or reciprocate rights with you. I can punch you back. That's self-defense. The are or will be sentient in the future is important because there are plenty of times when people are not sentient. They are asleep. They're in temporary comas. They're drunk and blacked out, or they're, drugged and unconscious for a medical operation. They are injured in some way. There's a whole lot. They're not yet developed enough, like a 2-year-old, for example, to participate in the realm of rights. They are not capable. They don't possess the sentient capacities as of yet to participate in rights, or at the time being, when you're asleep. When you're asleep, you don't cease to own everything around you. That's not how we treat rights. When you're asleep, you don't suddenly cease to own everything around you until such time as you wake up. Otherwise, it would be real easy. A thief could just wait till you're asleep, and as long as they're really quiet and don't wake you up, then they're not stealing anything when they take everything you own in your house. So you can see, once we understand what rights are as concepts and how they function by being reciprocated between people that have or will have the capacity to reciprocate them, suddenly a long list of debates and arguments and discussions and topics that are always really sticky, icky, and hard to get through, and contentious and subjective, and there's opinions and feels and emotions, they all become so much clearer and so much easier to discuss. And oftentimes the answer just falls right out in your lap, and it's like, oh, okay, well, that's just how it is. So we need to behave accordingly. And this is the case for abortion. From the moment a thing, an organism, puts itself on the track to become sentient, then it will become sentient. Thus, we should grant it rights. To exempt this thing that is going to be sentient in an arbitrary way, in a subjective way, and say, well, when you're 6 months old, you're not sentient yet. So, but we're going to afford you rights, as a human, as a personhood. I think this personhood stuff, without being defined, is worthless. We're going to give you rights, but, 6 months and 1 day earlier, not in some states, which is just insane infanticide. It's just insane that anyone is defending this now. We're in real trouble. If your rule for who gets rights is in any way arbitrary, is in any way subjective, is in any way not universalizable, meaning it cannot be applied to all things in all times, in all places, anywhere, everywhere, by all people, then it is not philosophically valid. And the best definitions, the best answers for these things I've found yet that meet those criteria are, and I'll say it one last time before I close the video, rights are a mutual, reciprocal understanding between sentient beings that should be afforded to all those beings that are or will become sentient and who continue to reciprocate them. Now, save it for another video, but what rights do we plug into that equation? Because a right could be anything, right? It could be, we all agree to pay for each other's medical care in some kind of communist utopia. That's a different discussion. But so far, the only universalizable rule that you can plug into the rights equation that can be used by all people in all times and all places at all times by everyone everywhere is the non-aggression principle. If you're not familiar with the non-aggression principle, Google it. It is awesome. It is amazing. It's basically what you were taught in 2nd grade. It's the golden rule on steroids. It is the initiation of force is always wrong. If we take that one simple rule and we plug it into what are rights and who gets them, the world becomes an exceedingly peaceful place, an amazing place to live, a huge step forward for society for all time. If you enjoyed this content, please consider donating. Check out our Subscribe Star Patreon Bitbacker. You can find all the links to everything on disenthrall.me/platforms. Thanks for watching.